Welcome back to the Development Book Club. Today we continue with the Dhammapada as translated by Gil Fronsdal. Middle section of the book. Let's hop in. First chapter we'll cover today is called The Sage, from which there are two sort of suttas that I would like to read to you guys. Irrigators guide water, Fletchers shape arrows, Carpenters fashion wood, sages tame themselves. Further he says, as a solid mass of rock is not moved by the wind, so a sage is unmoved by praise and blame. And there's a cool chapter called On Thousands, which could maybe be in the numerical discourses from earlier, but these are much shorter. It says, greater in combat than a person who conquers 1,000 times 1,000 people is the person who conquers herself. On violence, a nice one. Do not speak harshly to anyone. What you say will be said back to you. Hostile speech is painful, and you will meet with retaliation. A couple of passages on old age now. The person of little learning grows old like an ox. The flesh increases, but insight does not. Those who have neither lived the chaste life nor gained wealth in their youth lie around like arrows misfired from a bow, lamenting the past. Section called, the final one for today is called On Oneself. And we can compare this to the opening verse. Compare it. By oneself alone is evil done. Born of oneself, produced by oneself, it grinds down those devoid of wisdom as a diamond grinds down a gem. Contrast that to the Bible and this sort of externalizing of the devil. And there are passages around here where Mara is mentioned. There's like it's probably incorrect to call it their version of the devil. Anyways, furthermore, evil is done by oneself alone. By oneself is one defiled. Evil is avoided by oneself. By oneself alone is one purified. Purity and impurity depend on oneself. No one can purify another. And unrelated to these, but perhaps interesting given how we normally think of Buddhism, there's one more from this chapter called On Oneself. And the Buddha here says, don't give up your own welfare for the sake of others' welfare, however great. Clearly, know your own welfare and be intent on the highest good. This verse struck me as sort of perhaps counter to what we might think of Buddhism as. And I was thinking about it, don't give up your own welfare for the sake of others' welfare. I was interesting message, not one we would expect from the Buddha. And I was thinking, and I sort of went to, there's a podcast series, I think it's called Audio Dharma, and it's usually Dharma talks from Gil Fronsdal, who is the translator of this in his place up in Redwood City, California. It's called the Insight Meditation Center. And so I was looking on my phone, and I was like, oh, look at that. There's one that the title of this lecture from less than 2 weeks ago, that if you want to look it up, it's July 27th, 2018. The title of the podcast says, don't give up your own welfare for the sake of others' welfare. 37 minutes long. I was like, oh, great, look at that. So I went and listened to it, and he begins speaking of what we could call like Western Buddhism, this tradition we've been covering all year, how it tends to be sort of egocentric in a way that it's like, I attain enlightenment for myself, versus if you think back just to the book we just read about the Dalai Lama and Tibetan Buddhism with its more of a focus on compassion towards other people. And then Gil Fronsdal further talks about the structure of the Eightfold Path as a way to think about this verse, to sort of reconcile it, which is that the Eightfold Path begins with the self, with right view, that is, and then it goes sort of towards others, when we talk about right livelihood and right speech, which are fundamentally like interpersonal acts. And then it returns to the self with like right mindfulness, right samadhi. And so there were a couple of insights, more of which are in the podcast that I won't go into detail here. That is the middle section of the Dhammapada. Tune in next time and we will check out the end.